And just a little bit of a humor, political humor. There was a fellow Charlie Kirk was assassinated a few months ago now in America. You heard of him. So that name rang a bell. I'm not familiar with everybody. But my daughter heard the news and asked me, who's Charlie Kirk? I said, I think he's one of Ben Shapiro's friends. Like, I had an image in my mind. I think I heard the name. Like I said, I don't know a lot of these things. And the image that in my mind popped in of a certain guy with the beard and everything who was moderate in intelligence and a supporter of Israel. Turns out the image I had in my mind was a fellow I like, James Lindsay. Okay? Charlie Kirk, I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. Okay? Because I'm not following everything. But it was pretty much a shame. And James Lindsay also, he's a fellow traveler, except he's funnier. And he's the one who did academic prank. He created, if I'm not mistaken, if I am mistaken, so we shouldn't put this on the internet, but he created fake academic papers that were just garbage, nonsense, but it's what the leftists wanted to hear. So the academic journals didn't do their due diligence, and he submitted these academic papers, and they got published as serious, scholarship and research. And I think that it's not the first time it's been done. I remember there was one paper, they used a picture of the same guy. 3 professors wrote the paper. The difference in the pictures between the professors was in one picture he's wearing a big afro wig, and his other picture he's wearing a big fake mustache. Okay? So that's how he did it. So James Lindsay has written fake stuff and got it passed as academic, and then a month later he tells them, oh, look, it's a prank. Okay? Just to show them that how intellectually bankrupt they are. I think recently he submitted under a pseudonym, obviously, op-eds to papers, opinion pieces, whereby he basically was quoting large sections of Mein Kampf. You know what that is? Yeah. And the Communist Manifesto. And it got like, these are ideas that are worthy of consideration. These are the most discredited, worst ideas for humanity of the last 200 years. Well, except for, radical Islam. But even then, they borrow heavily from Mein Kampf.
Implies there's an
Well,
implies that there's an
if let's say the secular Islam, the less Islam, the better. Just like my view of Christianity, the less Christian Christianity is, actually it's better. It approaches Noahidism. Okay, so the less Muslims and Islamics are into real Orthodox Islam, the whole Itbach al-Yahud part of it, the better. Okay. Whereas for Jews, the less Jewish they are, it's worse for them. But like Rambam said, better that they not. A few chapters before he introduced the idea of Christianity and Islam, it says better for them not to have religion. Okay? Let them not come up with religion. So I was thinking about James Lindsay and his pranks because I didn't do that intentionally, but a lot of the things that we were discussing, about which we wrote, halachic issues, were, I basically was just writing things I find in old books. There was a thing, the Beis Yosef, Bar-Hayim, Siman Reish Mem Tet, that whole thing about ending Asar B'Teves early. All I did was present something that anybody could open up the book and find it. The Mishnah Berurah says this is the Shulchan Aruch's opinion. It's implied in the Shulchan Aruch, and it's right there in black and white, every printed edition of the Torah. And you'd think if someone studied Hilchos Shabbos and is supposed to know about Hilchos Shabbos, he would have, read this Beis Yosef in the Torah sometime, and been aware that this is the halacha that most of the Rishonim followed and the Shulchan Aruch followed, right? But the one that when Asar B'Teves is on Erev Shabbos, the fast is over when you take in Shabbos. Okay, either of two halachic mechanisms. There's 2 ways to understand the Gemara, the bottom line of the Gemara, but it doesn't matter which way you go because it leads to you taking in Shabbos before sunset, davening, eating, kiddush eating, and the sun is still shining. Perfectly legitimate. And I got someone out there to actually write it, Grossman's making this up. Like I said, okay? That's not the first time, There's other things, the whole Kiddush Levana thing, the shofar thing, and about 24 other issues, which, if you were following, let's say, Rabbi Rabinovich and Rav Zuriel, or Rabbi Bar-Hayim, or you just read Rav Kapach, or if you were just studying the Rishonim, you would have seen these things. They shouldn't surprise you, but to have someone go and say, I must be making this up, so that's funny. I should have done it intentionally, It would have shown how intellectually and also morally bankrupt these people are for, coming out against me, of all people, for just pointing this out, can't. And the dicta thing also. How many times someone comes to you, I never heard that before. Well, but it's usually hostile, It's been colleague teaching positions, guys in yeshiva. It cannot be, Hebrew should be lacking certain phonemes. It's always entertaining to have someone say, I never heard that before, and then you open up a book. Well, here it is, If you Chabadniks go through the Rambam every year apparently, so they shouldn't be surprised by most anything, right? Okay, well, Chabadniks never act surprised, but the worst is when they're hostile, especially to the dicta thing, pronunciation. Like, how dare you? That's the worst one. How dare you say that? There's only 2 ways to pronounce it tough, and your way isn't one of them. Okay, so that's a funny thing. I don't know if you've ever gotten that, but it happens. So today I had the non-hostile. You're the only one who's ever said that. I know. I never heard this before. Never ever. I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you, but if you've been studying it, it came up in Psachim. We're going to have it on YouTube soon. You said I never. People tell me you have to bring Korban Pesach today. We're obligated to bring Korban Pesach today. You should try to bring Korban Pesach today. I said yes. The sugya is we have a whole chart. Have a picture. The question is, if you're an onus or a shogeg, derech chok or a tamei, derech chok or a tamei could be onus or shogeg. That's a special category that falls into either or, and then there's what you did the next Korban Pesach. But the assumption is whether you're patur or chayav for missing, this, it all assumes that you still had to try to do Korban Pesach l'chachila. We saw there's a 3-way machlokes between the Rishonim, Rashi, Rambam, and Ravid. Ravid's the most makel with regards to the punishments. Rashi's the most machmir, and Rambam's sort of the middle ground. Do you remember this? I'll show you the chart. Okay, well, so here's the chart. You can open up, I think it's the 4th parak. It's in there. The problem with Makbili's chart is it gives you the Rambam's opinion, but it does not account for the Ravid or Rashi's opinion. Okay? So there it is. So there you go. But the assumption is in these halachas that you're supposed to be Korban Pesach. So I'm flattered that someone would take this as, I've never heard this before. Why aren't rabbis telling me this? I don't know. The thing is, we opened up Maseches Pesachim today, and it's talking about when you got to get rid of your chametz. Why do you got to get rid of your chametz by the afternoon of Passover, Erev Passover, Passover Eve? Why you got rid of your chametz? Because you can't perform Korban Pesach if you have chametz, right? Tashbisu just tells you have to get rid of your chametz sometime before Passover. It could have been that you could get rid of your chametz 5 minutes before the holiday starts. The whole thing, those shcharo chametz dam zevchi, and other psukim teach you got to get rid of your chametz even when it's time to offer Korban Pesach. Yeah, but we don't have Korban Pesach today. Nowadays, we haven't had Korban Pesach in a long time. I said, well, the halacha assumes that you're supposed to have Korban Pesach. Or what about the thing? Why are we allowed to actually burn our chametz from? And I pointed this out also. Sof siman bir chametz. It says in the Luach Sof siman. But every single source that we have in writing, at least from the Mishnah until Mishnah Berurah, from Mishnah to Mishnah Berurah, always assume that you start burning your chametz. That's the word they use. You start burning your chametz at the end of the 5th hour until the end of the 6th. That means from the time they call Sof siman bir chametz until chatzos. That's when you're supposed to burn the chametz. He says, but this doesn't allow then for someone to burn the chametz earlier in the day. What if I finish eating at 9 and I want to burn the chametz at 9:30, well before even the sof zaman achila? I'm not supposed to. He said that's the whole point. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch assume that the burning of the chametz is a formal act that's supposed to take place during a certain hour, not earlier. Even though bir chametz starts the night before, you say the bracha al bir chametz when you start checking the chametz at night, but you only actually burn the chametz or dispose of it much later. And it seems you're not supposed to. The words of the Mishnah in a few places, and this is the way the Gemara assumes, the way the Rambam paskins, it assumes that you only start burning the chametz at a certain point. An hour after you stopped eating the chametz, that's when you start burning it. That's when you start burning it. Who does it now? The Luach doesn't say that. The Luach has sof siman bir chametz, right? Isn't that surprising? So, and the answer is yes, because the Mishnah and the Talmud assumed a certain reality that even exists in Talmud time, which is sometimes there's chametz you don't want to burn so fast, which is challah, truma. Truma and challah existed as holy things that Kohanim could still eat well after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. That's why truma is a masechta of the Yerushalmi. Okay, in Rabbi Yochanan's time, well after the Churban, this is after the Mishnah, in Rabbi Yochanan's time, people were still eating truma and challah b'tara, Kohanim. Yes, they still had the paraduma water left over. They had a large supply that lasted well after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So the halacha doesn't take into account, I don't think the sages even imagined a time when there wouldn't be some sort of kodesh that's chametz. Sorry, there wouldn't be some sort of kodesh that's chametz dik. There's always going to be challah and truma. The fact that today absolutely no one's even attempting to eat truma or challah is a surprise. Well, it's been like that now for a good 1,000 years, and then some. So it's kind of funny, like explaining that these are things that did change only because you got used to not having Korban Pesach, you got used to not having truma and challah and things like that. But the sages assume that that's what's supposed to be, and the assumption also was today was the Sigd, right? The Ethiopian Sigd holiday. What's that all about? So, they had kisufim for going up to the Mikdash. They try to get out of Ethiopia, and they would go to the highest mountain and wait for the day when they can come out from Gullus. So it's, Maisa Shahaya, that Ethiopians were brought back to Israel after the founding of the state and all that, and they made it to Israel, and then go to Jerusalem. It's like, wait, you haven't rebuilt the Beis Mikdash? There's no Beis Mikdash? Wasn't that part of the plan? Come back, like, yeah, it's a good question. Why didn't Zionism include that? I think people like Ben Gurion and Golda Meir used to talk about, when we build the Beis Hamikdash, we're going to do this. But they're secular, so they didn't do that. So the Jews have to add that. That's the whole point of so-called religious Zionism, is supposed to add the elements that the seculars left out, right? But the religious Zionist establishment is like, oh, we're not going to lead the way. I don't get it. I don't, especially those Kavdiks. I don't understand why they're not pressing forward. They're the opposite of the Rav Kook, the first Rav Kook, who said that l'chadchila what needs to be done, and no one wants to take take charge. Okay, so back to the Ben Shapiro thing and the politicians. I put out a video a few weeks ago, and someone said, "Oh, you're blaming him, or you're attacking him for the phenomenon of the so-called right wingers who are now anti-Semites." I'm like, no, I'm not blaming him. I was just pointing out that he was associated with them before they all went off the derech. He's fighting them, and I actually believe, I agree with his mother, that he's actually doing important work in the political realm for the Jews, but also it is a losing cause, because Goyim love to become anti-Semites. It just, Germany, everybody ate those things up, these types of things. Everybody wanted to become an anti-Semite, and that's how the gullus continues. That's how the gullus comes to an end in every place. Jews are comfortable in a place, and then the hosts suddenly just turn on them, right? How many times in history has it happened? Every time. Oh, good. Yeah, so that's what's going to happen. It doesn't matter that the Jewish commentators, and I listened to a few last Friday, I think. Okay, the Jewish commentators who were thought leaders in these things, you know their names, are now really upset because everybody on the other side is abandoning them. Okay, the famous names, they're now persona non grata, which is kind of funny, but yeah, it's definitely not his fault. It's just it's just a shame,